Well, it's a movie music kind of. When you watch the movie and you hear this music, it's all together. It's like unbelievable effect.
A year ago fall, I guess that would be 2012, when we decided to program Alexander Nevsky, a very famous piece, one of the greatest cantatas and major choral works of the 20th century by Prokofiev. Who would have guessed, here we're looking at almost 2 years later, who would have guessed that we would have this conflict with Russia and Ukraine? So the timeliness of this could be questioned, and I did a bit of soul searching, as did our board and all the people associated, in deciding whether it was appropriate to program this piece and perform this piece now. And we decided, instead of running away from it, we decided to face it directly and use this as a chance to talk about a broader topic, to talk about the topic of nationalism, and also open up dialogue about this event.
History is always interpreted through the lens of the present. So when we talk about a work like Alexander Nevsky, you have a lot of historical frames. So there's the real story, the Alexander Nevsky story, who's, he's a regional prince, and he's in a really complicated geopolitical situation. He's got these Mongols coming. The Mongol horde, as it's called, or the Mongol Empire, was a huge empire in Eurasia, and very, very successful at incorporating kind of all the territory in the regions. And so poor Alexander has to deal with the Mongol Khan, who wants to sort of incorporate his territory. He's also got the Teutonic Knights in the west.
Sergei Prokofiev wrote this magnificent work, Cantata, Alexander Nevsky, first for a movie of Alexander Nevsky, which was directed by Sergei Eisenstein.
Ты один остался, господин Великий Новгород.
Prokofiev didn't know much about writing film music at first, but he was really interested. And when he was spending some time in Hollywood, actually Walt Disney asked him to write some scores. He went to the Disney studios and looked at their scores and learned quite a bit about film composition, and then was approached by this very famous director. And he loved the concept and the work, and so he was drawn into this project. So this cantata is divided in 7 movements. And the first movement really deals with an open, hollow kind of sound, and it talks about the destruction that happened as a result of Russia's interaction with the Mongols. As a matter of fact, the movie director had this quote in a description which he said were woeful traces of the ravages brought on Russia by the Mongols. Heaps of human bones, swords, rusty lances, fields overgrown with weeds, and ruins of buried villages. So a very desolate kind of sounding and hopeless situation. Yes, 'twas on, yes, 'twas on. What this calls for from a choir is a real variety of sound. It calls for some of the most compassionate, lush, soft, beautiful singing. It requires a choir who understands chant and understands Latin. It also requires a choir who can be ferocious and vicious too. He really uses the choir not only as the villagers and the peasants, he also uses them as the Teutonic Knights, and how powerful they are, and the clashing of swords and the banging of axes. It's just a very powerful section, and you'll hear this when the chorus sings. That's it. And the second movement is really about songs of Alexander Nevsky, and it deals with really the victories that he had and the triumphs, and over the Swedes at Neva. And Neva is really where Nevsky got his name.
So one of the things that's really hard for people, particularly in the United States, to understand is the role of artists in the Soviet Union. It was very different than the role of artists in the West. So under Stalin, in the 1930s, what are artists doing in the United States? They're on unemployment, they're standing in food lines, they're trying to get jobs with the Works Project Administration, right? We had the Federal Writers Project, if that means anything to you. But artists are struggling in the West. In the Soviet Union, by contrast, From the very beginning, the first days of the Russian Revolution, artists were a key part of the Soviet state, right? The Soviet state was not just about, hey, let's create a new economy, let's create a new political system, but let's create an entirely new culture. And artists were at the center of that. They had the best apartments in the city center. They had cars at their disposal. They had vacations. And most importantly, they had guaranteed audiences, right? Coming to their performances, coming to their shows, their exhibitions, etc. So people like Prokofiev were elites. Not just really great artists, but they were actually elites living in the best apartments with all the best accoutrement of privilege.
Arise, you mighty Russian folk, in battle just in life to death. Arise, ye people, free and brave, defend our native land, to living warriors high and sleep.
Then you have the Stalinist Soviet Union, right? In the 1930s, what's happening? The rise of, not the Teutonic Knights, but the rise of Hitler in Germany, right? The rise of fascism. Very stressful for the communist Soviet Union. And Prokofiev and Eisenstein, who's the filmmaker of the film of Alexander Nevsky, are trying to work on their cultural capital and credit under Stalin. They're cultural elites, but of course that means they're under the microscope. They have to make the right moves, right? And so they decide to make this film, and the state approves it, about this piece of history which they're interpreting as, hey, this is people in our part of the world successfully defending our part of the world from people in the West, i.e., in their minds, the Soviet Union defending itself against Nazi Germany.
One thing that we need to remember about this is when the film was made in 1938, and the cantata was written in 1938, when Russia and Germany they'd actually signed a non-aggression pact at that time.
And of course, it politically was not convenient to show a movie with such a nationalistic flavor, Russian nationalistic flavor against Germans.
Then in 1941, Germany abrogated the pact and invaded Russia, and at that point they released the film as a way of getting the Russian people to understand why they needed to fight. And it was very effective. It was a very effective tool for doing that.
This story in itself goes all the way back to the 1200s, and it deals with the time when the Swedes are charged with armor and horses and the newest of weaponry upon peasants who basically fought them off with stones and rakes and pitchforks, and it's a very compelling story for the people and their belief in protecting their homeland.
And in the music, Prokofiev is very, very programmatic in what he does. When he writes about the battle on the ice with the Teutonic Knights, you can actually hear the horses sliding around. The strings have these marvelous runs up and down in the music of the battle on the ice, where you can hear the horse, you can hear the horses.
It's written with depicting Russian army, mostly with folk little bit tunes, much more accessible and melodic to listeners' ear. And Teutonic Knights theme, it's always very strident, very dissonant, and very frightening.
But as they begin to start into the charge, you can hear the actual acceleration as the horses begin to go faster and faster and faster. And this Vinca am Kuchi Fel or Estis Perila that is being sung by the choir it's fantastic. And at the end of it, when they're really going fast across the ice, it gets to a tremendous speed. You can hardly pronounce the words because it's going so fast at that point. And then you start hearing the horses slide across the ice. Zip, 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 as they do. And then the peasants come in and you can hear them fighting the fights. You can almost see the picture even if you haven't seen the film. You can see what's happening.
It's a fantastic piece of work. When I perform it, I feel that my hair are just standing up of excitement.
It's been throughout Russia's history. They have this concept of Mother Rus, and that the land is Mother Rus, and you have to protect her. And so when you sing this, you need to think of this very mystical kind of being. It's this devotion to the land that is at the root of this whole film, the devotion to the land of Russia. If you talk to a Russian, it's a mystical kind of thing. It's almost like, as I say, it's like it's a real entity for them.
We grew up with this big idea of Mother Russia, how majestic it is, how, you know, all the ideas and the beauty of it, how we should care about it, how we should love it. It's also connected to the beauty of the woman. So, you know, like in all these fairy tales and folklore stories, they make connection, beauty of the land, like Mother Rus, with the beauty of the woman, beauty of the young girl. So it's all connected.
Prokofiev himself had an interesting quote. And let me read you this quote of Prokofiev as it talks about him and politics. I found this fascinating. He said, "As far as politics, they don't concern me. It is none of my business."
I think Prokofiev very much wanted this to be a piece about freedom.
Very few works can be politicized, really, because there are always two meanings. Like in many artists, there was like one script to please party, another maybe intimate thought what it really meant.
The important thing to realize about the Soviet Union is that it covered 11 time zones. And it was an incredibly multinational, multi-ethnic, multi-confessional space. It was never really more than 50% Russian.
But we are not from Russia. We are from a republic of USSR. But when we were growing up, it was Soviet Union, so everybody belonged to Russia. So I'm Russian, I speak Russian, but I grew up in a different republic, the same as Dina and the same as Ruta. So all of us, we didn't grow up in Russia.
So today, when we have cultural objects like Alexander Nevsky, the film, like Prokofiev's score, where do they belong? Are they national art? What kind of national art? Are they Russian art? Are they Soviet art? What are they? And really, they're Soviet art. I mean, it's products of the Soviet Union that were created in this cultural infrastructure for this Soviet audience. It was not a Russian audience, it was a Soviet audience. And one of the really interesting things that you see happening today with the crisis in Russia and Ukraine is a question about this cultural heritage and this cultural legacy, and people trying to redefine their cultural legacy and trying to figure out, well, what do we do with all of this Soviet art? What do we do with all of these Soviet films? Are these our films? Are they their films?
When there is artistic value to a work, we shouldn't avoid to perform it. I think it's part of our culture, our humanity, our human culture. It's not just one little ethnic group who is represented. It's our culture as human beings, cosmopolitan and citizens of this world.